Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the next edition of Simplicity Zen. Our guest today is Teshin Matthew Sweger. He is the teacher and resident priest at the North Carolina Zen Center. He was ordained as a Buddhist priest in 2004 by Lawson Sachter Roshi, a Dharma successor to Philip Kapelau Roshi. After completing the Harada-Yasutani koan curriculum, Teshin received Dharma transmission from Sevan Ross, a Dharma successor to James Myoun Ford Roshi. Teshin has recently received Inka from James Myoun Ford Roshi. He is a member of the American Zen Teachers Association. Teshin has also served as the Buddhist Chaplain for the University of Rochester for 5 years. Along with his work at North Carolina Zen Center, Teshin works as a psychotherapist and is trained in intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy and as a acceptance and commitment therapist. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Barry, for having us. And thank you for doing this podcast. It's been sort of, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say it's sort of like the lamp record, the modern version of the lamp records.
Yeah, I mean was kind of my intention, and I think this is released through both YouTube and the podcast networks, and in the podcast version, I actually say lamp record edition or something like that.
Oh,
We have our tradition has a long history of taking historical records of itself, so I kind of wanted to continue.
Family's important, right?
Yeah. I've said this before, but I don't mind saying it again, is what got me into Zen practice wasn't philosophical treatises and eightfold paths and 12-fold causations lists. Like none of that resonated with me at all. But what did resonate was reading about narrative history or narrative stories of people's practices and how it changed their lives and what they went through and how practice worked for them. Like that's what motivated me to practice. Everything from the first person accounts and three pillars of Zen to the stories of Bankai or Hakuin or Dogen or like just hearing about their path, like that's what I'm like, oh, this is real. People actually do this, and so I wanted to continue that, offer that to people, for other people who might be motivated in the same way. That's kind of my motivation.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, story is what has motivated and passed so much of our wisdom down through the years and what motivates people, right?
Yeah, and also an ancillary benefit of this has been a few people have reached out to me and said and have told me about how you interview here, they've met students or even in some cases like sanghas grew from it, and so like it's been a good kind of matchmaking service too to some degree.
Well, I hope they come in droves,
Right. Yeah. You're gonna have to get a security guard probably.
Yeah, exactly. Some bodyguard.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the Inca.
Thank you. Yeah, it was wonderful to have James Roshi here in person and do sesshin with us. So we just finished that last Sunday.
Yeah, that's great. So this is going a little out of order of your chronological story, but how did you end up working with James? So you got your transmission from one of James' disciples, but then you got Inka from James. How did that come about?
Kind of in a convoluted way.
Yeah.
So Sevan Ross, who I received Dharma transmission from, was approached by James and Sevan knew each other for many years back in probably since the early 2000s, probably actually before that. They were both members of the AZTA, and James approached Sevan about the lineage difficulty or problem in the Rochester tradition, which is that Kapelau Roshi never finished his formal koan training with Yasutani Roshi.
Someone told me this, I already forgot. How far did he go in the training?
Through the Blue Cliff record. But after that, he was already in America and teaching, and they had this break. And
so he didn't do Book of Serenity.
No.
Okay.
No. So in the Rochester tradition, up until that point, you would do the Mumon, do the miscellaneous Mumon Kan and Blue Cliff record twice. You would go through them twice, and then the precept koans, and then but James knew that this was a sort of a stain of sorts on the record of the Rochester tradition, and offered Sevan to work with him to complete that, to sort of correct that. And Sevan thought about it and eventually said, "Yeah, why not?" And so they began working together, and completed that over years, and then fast forward to when I worked with Sevan. So I wanted to do that, and Sevan was the only person in our lineage that had done that. So I went to him. I had known him since the early 90s, but went to him and began working on the subsequent koans, the Shoyoroku, et cetera. And then when he offered me transmission, as you probably know, you have to copy all these documents and scrolls and things. And I got to the place where on one of the documents it has this term, Iron Man. And I had no, like, what is this, some sort of Marvel movie reference or something. So I called Sevan, and he didn't have any idea. And he said, "Why don't you just call James?" So that's how I met James. I just emailed him and said, "Hey, could we talk? I have some questions." And the rest is history. We just got to know each other over the years.
Have you done any actual koan work with James?
We've reviewed koans, sort of in a informal way, having done them multiple times with multiple teachers. Wasn't so much about the koans; it was more about getting to know each other and appreciating the practice together. And so we've just been meeting for years on Skype and then Zoom, and just kind of having coffee together, and then at some point I expressed a kind of just a sentiment to him. I said it would be nice to have some sort of formal Dharma connection with you. But he said, "Well, you've already got Dharma transmission, so what's it's really not necessary." But then at some point he said, "Well, why don't I offer you Inca?" And so I didn't know how all that worked. In every lineage it's different, and so we talked about it and then worked towards that.
When you say work towards that, was there some sort of curriculum, or was it just kind of informal? Up type of thing.
Yeah, just more getting to know each other and how we see what's important Dharma wise, and making sure we're on the same page. And it was clear from the moments we met that we saw eye to eye on things. Obviously we have different personalities and different. He's a UU minister. My wife is a lifelong UU, and she's actually a student of his. And so I didn't grow up UU. I didn't have any connection with that. But with Dharma stuff, there's no question. We clicked, and So there wasn't any kind of real formal process. It just seemed to make sense.
And the Inca ceremony itself, was it like half private, half public, or all public, or what was the ceremony?
It was all public. So Dharma transmission is done traditionally, or at least the way it's traditionally done is mostly in private. And then with Inca, at least the way we did it, and the way I think he did it with John Tarrant, was to do a public ceremony. So it was we had some chanting with it, but the Inca ceremony itself was quite simple. And it was.
Did you have to copy any documents or anything like that?
No, all that's already been done through Dharma transmission.
Yeah. And then
so he gave me a Roxu and some paper, a beautiful book with the acknowledgement inside the cover page, and so and Jan, his wife, sewed me this beautiful Roxu, so it was nice to receive, and a couple other gifts, small gifts that were publicly given.
Uh-huh. Were the was the
Yeah.
part of the ceremony did include the precepts? Did you do the precepts again?
Nope.
Nope.
No, no, not with Inca. I think there's Incas. This is more of the lay lineage through the koan lineage rather than the priestly lineage that
Mhm.
comes through Jiu
Mhm.
Roshi. So there's the Denkai and Denbo ceremonies that are done with the precepts and all of that, and lots of paperwork and lots of formality. And then there's this more lay oriented ceremony, Inca.
Mhm.
At least that's how we did it. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I'm curious. So you presumably went pretty deep into the Kapelau koan curriculum when you started the I guess it would be the Diamond Sangha curriculum through James's lineage. So did you find that what the teachers were looking for in the koans was very different, or was it pretty similar?
It was pretty similar.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. The 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 spirit is always the same, which is to see that dance between the form and the emptiness,
Mhm.
and how it is constantly being expressed by the masters.
Mhm.
And so the presentations, they might have different slightly different presentations occasionally here and there, but some of that just developed over time too. I have Kapelau Roshi's notes on his early doksans with Yasutani Roshi back in the 1950s and 60s. And it's a different emphasis sometimes than what's now being transmitted in Sambo Zen.
Mhm.
Uh, because I also work still with Valerie Forstman Roshi
Oh.
at Sambo Zen, and before that Henry Schuckman. So
Mhm.
I was doing books on with both of them to review koans, because it's such a wonderful practice, as you know.
Mhm.
And I just always thought that having a teacher myself, even though I am a teacher, but I think everybody should have a teacher. So
Mhm.
I still go docs on with Valerie. We meet
Okay.
when we can, and just review koans together.
Did you switch from Henry to Valerie when he got hurt? Was that what precipitated that?
Yeah, yeah. Henry just wasn't available much after his cycling accident. He couldn't look at the screen much without getting headaches and having a real price to pay.
Mhm.
So he suggested that I start working with Valerie if I wanted to continue.
Mhm.
And before that, we had like a cohort of teachers together that we would meet also to talk about koans, and but that had to discontinue as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, it's too bad,
Yeah.
but but
Yeah.
Valerie's a wonderful teacher. I recommend her for anybody.
Yeah.
She's very
That
clear.
whole little sublineage is so vibrant
Absolutely,
and amazing. I really,
it is.
yeah. Um, so, right. So, kind of maybe switching gears a little, kind of autobiographical stuff. Could you talk a little bit about where you were born, what maybe your early childhood was like, and so forth?
Yeah, I can do my best. I'm not that good with dates,
That's
so
fine. As
okay.
long as you can get it to like within a week or two of the events.
No problem, no problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was raised in outside of Washington D.C. in a small town, a commuter town for that was sort of developed for all the federal workers in
What was it
Washington.
called?
Laurel,
Oh, I
Maryland.
grew up in Silver Spring.
Oh yeah, right down the road.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh wow, wow. That's
Yeah.
nice. So yeah, I spent a lot of time in Silver Spring too as a teenager.
Yeah. You know where the Mormon temple is? I live walking
Yeah.
distance from that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I always looked at that as a kid. Going down the belt, or the is it 495?
Probably.
Uh,
I was a kid. I was
yeah,
like,
and seeing the huge
yeah.
castle like that, I always thought it was a castle as a kid.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's
so
like a palace.
it is. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's real gold up there too, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So grew up in Laurel, and nice suburban little community, and most of the people that lived in that community were federal workers. And so, occasionally we'd get a knock on the door and be an FBI agent, or agents wanting to interview neighbors about, somebody that was applying for a job or something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so pretty basic middle class, or not basic, but
Yeah.
pretty standard middle class upbringing.
Yes. Yeah. Incredible neighborhood to grow up in, walkability and just feeling safe overall.
Yeah. My dad actually worked for the Carter administration and then Amtrak.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So that's why
my dad, it was never clear what he did. He didn't talk much about it.
Must be a spy then.
That's what everyone thought. Everyone when I was in high school said, "Your dad's a spy." But I do know he worked for the Department of Navy. He worked Department of Defense. He was often in Europe in places.
Would he come home like limping with injuries and not want to talk about it?
Right. No, not quite. Not quite. But not sure what he did, but he was a military background, etc. So.
Was he, would you say was conservative, having kind of come from that background, or?
No. And I only found that out as a sort of a young adult, that he wasn't as conservative as one might think. And that I thought he actually, in getting to know him more adult to adult, he actually has quite progressive views.
Mm-hmm.
But just, my last name Sweger means quiet man in German. So there wasn't a lot of getting to know my dad.
He lived up to the name.
He lived up.
Yeah. How about religion? Did you guys grow up going to church or anything like that?
We started going to church when I was in elementary school. I think they wanted us to have some sort of structure, but it wasn't central to their lives, other than the sense of community and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
But we went to Presbyterian church, a very liberal Presbyterian kind of church, that the minister was actually gay. Nobody knew it at the time, but him and his partner, who was the choir director, they were. So it was very open, progressive feeling to the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so went to Sunday school, was baptized and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Did you believe?
Not for a minute.
No, you never did.
No, not for a minute. And in fact, even going to church, to Sunday school was a turnoff for me. Mm-hmm. It was even just the smell of stale coffee in the air all the time at church, was not something I really wanted to be a part of. But it was fun to, they had nice musicals. I was in a lot of musicals as a kid, and they had great, it was fun. Christmas service was beautiful and all of that. But I liked the minister. He was very heartfelt, very he was grounded. He was very welcoming. So I felt a kind of sense of belonging from him. Mm-hmm. So I think that was the most meaningful thing about church was
your kind of ministry. Did you ever have any direct interaction with him, or is it more just kind of watching him from the pews type of thing?
He was just a very friendly guy. So not much. We would be at dinner parties together but
no like pastoral counseling or anything like that.
No, not really. He did perform my sister's marriage ceremony, and I got to know him a little more as a young adult. He actually he actually pulled me aside and sort of in confidence told me that he had an affinity with something.
Oh, he did.
Yeah.
So kind of as a teenager, could you kind of describe what your temperament was like? Were you like nerdy and quiet, outgoing and athletic, or?
Yeah, I was an interesting mix. I was highly anxious. Mm-hmm. I felt misunderstood. I was pretty introverted,
Hmm.
and yet I also had this other kind of personality side of performance and wanting to be in the spotlight and um, um,
You mean like drama club and stuff, or yeah?
drama. I was in drama club. I was in art club and things like that, and I also had a lot of good friends that were more extroverted, so they sort of led the way and paved the way
Hmm.
for me.
Hmm.
I just sort of rode on their coattails, and but underneath that was a pretty, like I said, anxious, unsure kid,
Hmm.
and lots of questioning, lots of doubts, lots of insecurities.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Any,
which I tried to hide. No, I
yeah,
wasn't.
as most people do,
Yeah,
yeah. Did any experimentation with drugs or partying or hallucinogenics or anything like that?
in high school was a lot of drinking,
Hmm.
a lot of drinking, too much drinking, and in fact, looking back, it's a wonder that we survived at all.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I think
can
it was only, it was just through sheer privilege and luck that we got through teenagerhood unscathed. Um,
drunk driving and stuff like that.
yeah, all kinds of stupid stuff that, in fact, I started making fake IDs. I hope I think a lot of my students know that about me, but I'm going to learn a lot more, I suppose. So, yeah, I started making fake IDs in high school too, and had some some run-ins with police and stuff like that. So,
Hmm.
um, so yeah, yeah, no, it was quite a wild teenager ride, and that sort of continued into early college.
Yeah. Do you ever try hallucinogenics?
Not in high school, no,
Is that
not in high school, but
or
in college.
college?
In
Hmm.
college, I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What was your experience with those?
Well, my first experience was taking a tab of LSD,
Hmm.
um, and just blew my mind. Um, I I I remember that like it was yesterday. Um, so that was a pretty powerful experience, and I would say that sort of opened me to the possibility that there was something other than the reality that I was experiencing. You
Hmm.
know, I think that's their value overall, is that they can just show you past your limits.
Hmm.
What you take to be what's here.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while, and mushrooms and LSD, and I stopped drinking. It was just not appealing anymore. I think I burned that side of myself out in high school
Hmm.
pretty fast.
Hmm. Yeah, I had a
Um,
really similar experience. My friend was a year or two older than me, and so he was in college, and his dad, his wealthy dad, basically got him an apartment and a couple $1,000s a month to live on, and I dropped out of school and went to live with him, and we just, I mean, like you, I'm literally lucky to be alive, and like I never did hard drugs, but hard partying, and by the time I got to college, it was all out of my system. And so where all my friends were like, freedom, party, I was just like, I'm just gonna stay home and read.
yeah,
I
yeah,
just
and for me too, the psychedelics weren't party drugs.
Yeah,
I,
totally.
I, people, I still don't understand how people take those and party. For me, when I was doing those, it was very introspective. I would just want to be alone. I mean, sometimes I was with a couple of people, but it was more of an inward turning. And in fact, one of my friends would want to just ask me questions while I was on LSD, and like,
Mhm.
what are you experiencing? But that's about as much interaction as I wanted to have.
I remember one time, um, I was staying with my friend up in South Lake Tahoe. This was another kind of wealthy friend with no responsibilities and lots of money and a place to stay. And there was a party once where everyone took acid, and somehow these skinheads wound up at the party, like these, like racist skinheads, and they ended up taking acid too. And it was amazing. Like they're like, I think a couple of them like Like basically, it was a bunch of skinheads come to party with the hippies, and they were like I can't live with hate in my heart anymore, and like I mean, it was like it was like a couple of them like basically renounced their racist views there that night from all the acid and just vibes from the hippies and stuff. It was really, I'm not sure I've thought about the incident until right now when you said party, and it made me think like, did I ever take acid at parties? And I remembered this, and
Yeah.
it was just incredible just seeing them, their hate melt away from the
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the value of these substances, and as you probably know these days, that in mental health, that it's this sort of new wave of treatment that's
Mhm.
emerging now. Now that the sort of stigma is being lifted off of psychedelics with mushrooms or psilocybin or with ketamine and other mild hallucinogens, that
Mhm.
they can change. They are showing to work on the structure of the brain, structural changes, not just
Yeah.
sort of temporary shifts in consciousness. And so it's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. I have a number of patients that I work with that um, they'll do a course of ketamine or a course of psilocybin, and I'll work with them
Mhm.
on the end and backside of that.
Yeah, so some recent papers I've read are working towards an idea where there's the kind of the mystical LSD experience or hallucinogenic experience. It kind of opens a little window of plasticity where like beliefs can be washed away. Kind of almost like don't know mind window of opportunity opens up, and that seems to be where a lot of the magic happens. Is like just
Yeah.
like it's a little window of opportunity. So apparently, just hallucinogenics by themselves are a lot less efficacious than hallucinogenics with like follow up therapy, because
Yeah.
there's that window of plasticity that opens up. Um,
Right. Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
I'm
It
not telling you
basically
anything
when
you don't
you're
know, but
what's that?
I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know from your
No, it's
practice.
fun to talk about. I mean, again, we're on the sort of leading edge of that in the therapeutic world. Um, for me too, there's an element of for people that are dealing with depression or anxiety, that there's a positive element of losing control,
Hmm.
right? Because when you're on a substance like that, you just don't have any conscious control of what's happening.
Hmm.
And so if you can let go into that, then it can resolve, or it can show you a different way of being,
Hmm.
where you don't have to assert yourself so hard.
Hmm. So, growing up, did you have any? Do you think there were any kind of subconscious influences towards Eastern spirituality, like martial arts or like Star Wars, Jedi stuff? Was any of that? Like people who
Yeah,
are
yeah,
around my age, I always ask them about Star Wars because,
yeah,
in retrospect, I think just the whole Jedi archetype and let go of your thoughts, Luke, and like I think that.
yeah, yeah. Of course, absolutely, and which goes to George Lucas's influence by
Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell and those archetypes. So
Yeah,
yes, I saw the first Star Wars in the movie theater.
yeah, me
Um,
too. I didn't know.
yeah,
I was 5, so I didn't really get it. But
yeah. I think I was 6, I believe.
Mhm.
Um, but it was wild, and growing up under that influence, it certainly had an effect on me. And I also had a friend who was in martial arts in elementary school, and he was half Japanese. And I remember him lending me a book on martial arts, but it wasn't the martial arts that really grabbed me. It was on the back, either the last page or the back cover, or both. There was a little blurb on Zen,
Mhm.
and I read that. And at the time, it was interesting, but I didn't know how much it actually was influencing me, but it did.
Mhm.
It sort of set a powerful seed somewhere in there.
Mhm. How did you find out about Buddhism more formally and start to get into it and stuff?
In college. So I was in college. I was in my, I think it was my literature class. What do they call that? Comp or advanced lit or something like that. My literature teacher, he was a member of the Rochester Zen Center. I didn't know that at the time.
Was
Uh,
this in Rochester where you went?
no, this was at a small university in Maryland called Frostburg State.
Okay.
And and so he came back one time from Sesshin. Again, I didn't know that, but
Mhm.
he looked different. Um, and I just picked up on it. And then he came right into class and he just said, he just looked at us and is directly at all of us and just said, class is canceled.
Maybe had a little opening during that session or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly. But so I got my interest was piqued. Like, what's with this guy? Because I was the opposite. Like I said, I was pretty high strung,
Mhm.
anxiety to the point where it was debilitating. You know, I didn't know it at the time. I'd never been diagnosed with anything, but
It
I
was
was
just
so
normal reality for you.
yeah, I was so self conscious as a college student. You know, I all I cared about was what other people thought of me, and
Mhm.
to the point it was paralyzing, really. And and so what I saw in him was the exact opposite. You know, this kind of freedom. And so we talked informally, and I had an interest in philosophy already. I had taken some philosophy class, and but I didn't quite understand Western philosophy. So we started talking, and then he just invited me to his house for a sit,
Mhm.
and taught me how to sit, and
Wow.
we I took to it immediately.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And did you start a daily sitting practice at that point?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because it immediately had effects on my nervous system.
Interesting. So
It
you hadn't read
100%.
anything or anything like that, like three.
You know, in our philosophy class, I think we touched on some of the classics, you know, the Upanishads and the Tao Te Ching and the some writings of Zhuangzi,
Mhm.
the Taoists, you know, and maybe some Nagarjuna,
Mhm.
some light Nagarjuna, and you know that was
Is
interesting to
is there
me.
such a thing?
What's that?
Is there such? It sounds like an oxymoron, light and Nagarjuna. But,
Right, right,
yeah.
exactly. Um, but I wasn't really interested in the philosophy as much as the practice.
Mhm.
It, I'm I'm not that intellectual of a person. I'm more sort of it's more about the feeling inside and what the practice was actually doing for me.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that was the draw.
Mhm.
And he and then he's we started a sitting group together. Um, and he had Kapelau Roshi come to the university. That was before my time, but he over the years he just would get grant money to bring teachers from the Rochester Zen Center down to run workshops, introduction to Zen workshops, and I helped with running a few of those.
Mhm.
And read. He gave me the Three Pillars of Zen. Read that. That's my first book that I really read
Me
about
too.
Zen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, did so would you say you're kind of like your motivation to begin Zen practice was just kind of relief from anxiety? Was that kind of the initial
Yeah.
impetus, would you say?
I would say that, but I wasn't that conscious of
Hmm.
that. I mean, it was happening,
Hmm.
but I didn't say to myself, "Oh, this is relief from my anxiety." It was just I felt more. It
Hmm.
just felt right. I felt in touch more um, with myself and with my surroundings, not so much in my head anymore.
Hmm.
And it also gave me a sense of purpose. To be honest with you, it was something other than the party scene in college, you know, to be a part of a sitting group and to have these regular meetings together and
Hmm.
make connections with the Sangha in Rochester was incredible for me.
Did you go up there, or was it mostly just people coming down?
I also went up there. So he urged me to go to a workshop up there. So that was my first introduction, formal introduction, was driving up to Rochester, and then staying the weekend, going to an intro workshop, and then to their Sunday sit,
Hmm.
meeting Bowden Roshi, who was Bowden Sensei at the time,
Hmm.
and
Was
seeing
Capello
the
still
books.
alive? Was Capello alive at that point?
Yeah, he was in Florida. He
Mhm.
was retired to Florida and running a small sitting group in there. So I didn't meet him till many years later.
What was your opinion of the physical, like just being there, like going to a formal Zen center?
Yeah, well, that was where it was at for me. that blew my mind. I don't know if you've been to the Rochester Zen Center,
Nope.
but it's like, a number of the larger centers in America, San Francisco or Daibasatsu or any of these Zen mountain. For me, it was walking in the buildings. You smell the incense. It sort of permeates everything. The care in the place. For me, it was just the aesthetics of the place. The beauty, the care, the woodworking was
Hmm.
wild. Um, and that is what got me hooked, I would say, more than what was said by any teacher.
I was talking to oh boy, what's his name? He was actually my first interview. My brain's still mush from COVID. Anyway,
Mado
no,
or
he's a Renzai guy. He does like the energy work. I mean,
oh yeah, yeah.
it's crazy that I
I know
forgot
who
his name. I'm, yeah,
Corey.
Wes.
Has.
No, I gotta look. If he's watching this, I'll be really embarrassed. But why can't I think of his name? Anyway, so anyway, him and I had a very similar experience. There's this book. I think I have it down there, where it's basically it's like a photo. It's a black and white photo pictorial of this life in a Rinzai Zen monastery, and like seeing the monks in their life, just like that. I remember reading that book, and if I remember, Corey Hess, that's his name. I think Corey said the similar thing, and just reading that book and seeing those monks in action. Like from that moment on, and this was, I think I'd already read Three Pillars of Zen, so I was interested in Zen. But I remember when I saw that book in action, that's when I knew I wanted to do Zen. Like just seeing, like kind of use just the aesthetics of it. Like I just knew that was my path.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that we need to be careful about with when we are deciding what to transmit to America, what gets thrown out and
Uh-huh.
what doesn't. Is there something about the
Yeah.
physical relationship with the sense of place and I was just in Japan, for example, and just to be among the temples is
Mhm.
just that sense of grounded place is life changing.
Mhm. Do you go there for work or vacation or?
I just went there. I had planned a trip pre-COVID, and that got canceled. So we were just going to go over. My wife and I were going to go over um, to see some of the temples, and that got canceled. She couldn't go over this time, so I went with a couple of friends, and we
Mhm.
spent 11 days over there, and went to Bukokuji and Hoshinji as well. That was
Oh,
the
you
sort of
did?
highlight. Yeah,
Nice. So you got to sit with them, I imagine, at those places?
yeah. Well, not at Hoshinji. Hoshinji is no longer a training monastery. It's
Oh, it's not.
no, it's reverted
Oh,
back to it's reverted back to the Soto Shu. So they have a caretaker monk.
oh,
Um,
I always thought it was Soto Shoe. All even when they were doing the more koan style, I thought it was always officially a Soto Shoe monastery.
maybe it was, but what I mean is they when I guess when Harada Roshi died, um, it sort of ceased to function as a training monastery, and so
I see.
it's a very beautiful place. They have money. It's well cared for. A lot of the buildings have been rebuilt.
Mhm.
I'm told that a lot of that work was done under Harada Roshi, but um, I think it's mainly supported just by lay donations.
Mhm.
The Zendo's empty. It's not used.
How's Bokokoji? Is there monks living, or are there
A few,
residents living there and practicing, or?
a few. It's a very small crew. There was a few people, a lay woman who was wonderful, and a few monks. And it's run by Kogaku-san, who is a successor to Tangen Roshi.
Yeah.
So he's maybe a couple years younger than me.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So I think
Japanese.
Japanese.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I think
He's
without
not
Tangen,
offering. He's not offering Dokusan, is my understanding, right? Like koan study.
I think I asked him. I think they don't do koan study. in this classic in the way that we do, but I think he still will offer Doksan during Sesshin.
Well, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Huh. And did you make it to like Eheji or any of the big Kyoto monasteries or anything like that?
Yeah, we saw most of the big monasteries in Kyoto. So all the Rinzai Zen complexes, Daitokuji and Yoshinji, and a few others. And then I made it to Eiheiji, which was great.
How's
Yeah. Oh my God, the trees is where it's at, really.
Yeah.
The
Big cedars, right?
Cedar trees that are probably 8 feet in diameter, or more. They're like cathedrals that are just towering and very powerful to walk around. And we got to see some ceremonies, from peeking in as the 100 monks were in there doing a very choreographed.
Right.
It's like a dance performance, really.
Yeah.
And I met an English monk who was doing a ceremony, part of the ceremony there.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Was so at the Rinzai temples in Kyoto, would you see the monks walking around, or are they kind of all behind?
Yeah, they're mostly not visible. Saw a few priests walking around, at the sub temples. It's like a little, probably know this, but it's like more like a little village. It's like a university where there's lots of little temples inside, behind gates and walls. And so, I would do my best to sneak back through and, until I was shooed out or something. So, and I was there during the autumnal equinox, so I got to see a ceremony and participate in a ceremony, with lots of chanting, and at one of those sub temples.
I'm curious, would you wear your rakusu at those temples, or you just kind of walk around?
I just walked around.
Yeah.
I did wear my rakusu at Eiheiji. It just felt right, being a official. I'm a Soto priest, so it felt okay. Why not? And there were lots of rakusus for sale there.
They were interesting.
And there were vendors and selling rakusus and robes and things. Yeah.
Interesting. Like little stands leading up to the monastery type of thing.
On the way out, there were.
Oh, like part of the monastery itself.
No, I don't think they were part of the monastery. They were just like it was like kind of fair, like when you go to a street festival and there's just little vendors. They had a few of those, and yeah. So that's one of the fun things about being in Japan is you can just Google, temple store, and there you go. You want to go to a place that sells altars and bells, and and you walk in and you spend your whole life savings.
Did you get any good paraphernalia?
Did I what?
Get any good paraphernalia?
I tried, but I couldn't afford most of the things. We're looking for a good mokugyo for the temple here, and couldn't afford one. Japanese mokugyos are way too expensive. But I got some small stuff. I got a few things from most of the people, maybe teachers listening to this know of a place in Kyoto that sells to Westerners. So I visited him.
Does it have like a guy's name in the URL or something like that?
Yeah, Tommy.
Yeah, Tommy.
He goes by Tommy. I think it's like Tama something. It's a Japanese name that's like has Tom in it. But he was very nice, very gracious, and very accommodating to us non-Japanese speakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I chatted with him once. It sounds like, if I understood him, it sounds like he's like multi-generational business that sells to monks. Like they're like kind of an official Sotoshu vendor through multiple generations of families. Like that's their job, like their like family business,
Yeah. They go around and see who needs what,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So totally unrelated, but what was the best thing you ate in Japan?
Pizza. That we went to this great pizza place called Monstar Pizza, and it was like New York style pizza, and it was a little hole in the wall, and there was MTV videos from the 1980s playing, and shiitake mushrooms on the pizza. It was great. no,
Cool.
no. But aside from that, there was what is it called? Uh, it's temple food. I forget the Japanese ryokai, Norin ryokai, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And it's really
Like really
yummy.
delicately presented and multiple bowls, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All vegetarian.
Hmm.
So it's really hard to eat vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian since I've been 20 years old. So
Hmm.
it's really hard to be vegetarian in Japan.
Really?
Yeah, yes,
You
it
can't even get
is.
like
It's
cucumber rolls or anything like that.
I mean, it's even the stuff that says it's vegetarian or vegetables, have pork and chicken broth and
Hmm.
all seafood and in there. So it's all mixed in. It's really hard to get pure vegetarian food.
Right. Like even the miso probably has the bonito flakes. Yeah, that kind
Yeah, exactly. That kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so cool. So you jumping back to your early Zen days, did you have was like existential angst any part of it at all for you, or was it just kind of not on your radar?
Yeah, oh yeah. That was all tied into, again, the self-concern,
Hmm.
me, and what do other people think of me? That was all rooted in this sense of really not knowing who I was and um scrambling to try to find out. So yes, it was all under there.
Hmm.
And my first teacher, Bodhin Roshi, he sensed that, and so just like everybody else that comes through that has any kind of that kind of questioning, you get put on Mu,
Hmm.
and that becomes your channel
Hmm.
for your all of that. I tell my students it doesn't have to be a formulated question. It doesn't have to be like, you know, why, it doesn't have to involve words. It can just be a sense of unease or a sense of disquiet or longing for something. You just channel that all into, uh,
Hmm.
and so that's what I did.
And you, this is pretty early in your Zen career. You went on the move.
Yeah, well, I practiced for maybe a year with breath, following the breath, counting the breath, which is the
Hmm.
tradition, counting exhalations and then moving to following the breath and then quickly. I was chomping at the bit, so I knew about koans from reading, and I said I want a koan,
Hmm.
and he said, and of course he says, well, is there any koan that that you have in mind?
Hmm.
Knowing full well that he would put me on Mu,
Right.
but the illusion of choice is nice,
That's
and
funny.
so
Just
yeah,
fun.
started working in earnest, and then starting sashins.
Hmm. Um, what did you find sessions physically hard at first? Like
Yeah,
some people
no.
sit without much pain, some people don't. I was one of the don't crew. I mean,
Oh, really?
sitting was brutally hard for me.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know this at the time, but having spent my teenage years, I didn't mention that, skateboarding
Hmm.
and doing damage to my knees. I didn't know that would come back to haunt me, but it did.
So as
So
a Maryland skateboarder in the mid '80s, were you a Minor Threat fan?
yeah, of course.
You go to those shows?
I didn't really go to shows that much, but I think they played at a couple of skateboard, like when the Bones Brigade came through,
Hmm.
to some of the skate shops.
Hmm.
But them, Agent Orange,
Black Flag.
other what's that? Yeah, yeah. I wasn't too much into that, into the punk rock, into the it wasn't my thing, but yeah, I still heard it all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Minor Threat just I heard them. I was probably still in like sixth grade or something. When I heard it, it just blew my mind. Like I was so blown
Mhm.
away by them. I mean, because they were kind of a local band, you know, around that place.
Yeah,
So did you? So sessions were hard for you.
they were very difficult. I hated sashins. In fact, um, when I moved to Rochester to be in residence there, and I just remember the car rides, the afternoon before Sashina's beginning, the car rides back to campus, back to the Zen Center. I'd be out with friends or something, and the car ride back, it was like the stress, the fear, was just gripping, and it
You're
was
being
like
like,
my life was ending, and then physically my knees were pretty problematic. So I would take a chair during Teisho to
mhm,
just cut the edge off, and and then just learn to endure the pain and work with it, which
mhm,
was very helpful. Um, but often would, yeah, just go, what the hell am I doing this for? So it was quite painful in the beginning for the first
mhm,
few years, I would say.
mhm. Were
And then
you
after
able
that,
to dive into Mu pretty deeply right away, or was that something you had to that kind of
no,
grew on
no,
you?
I was, yeah, yeah. I didn't pass move for 6 years, um, but would get into, you know, Doksan, and there was a lot of loud moving back then,
Mhm,
voicing the koan,
mhm,
um, in Doksan or outside of Doksan.
mhm.
Those sashins were very energized, Doksan rush, and lots of stick, lots of kyosaku and
Was there
stuff
like
like that.
angry
So,
talk, like breakthrough and like stuff like that?
well, Sevan was at that time one of the monitors, and so he would give these kind of fire and brimstone encouragement talks right before Doksan was about to begin,
Hmm.
and to kind of fire people up. And it's not my style these days,
Hmm.
but it worked for me as a young man. It didn't work for everybody,
Yeah.
and Kapleau's style is not for everybody. Back before my time was even much more intense than that, and
Mhm.
it didn't work for a lot of people. But for me, it was very motivating.
Was it clear to you when other people would pass Mu?
Was it clear if other people
Like
passed
like
Mu?
like other people in the session, was it did you would people know if they
Uh,
passed Mu? No.
no, we were told never to talk about Doksan.
Hmm.
Um, it was really highly discouraged to talk about what happened in Doksan.
Hmm.
But there were clues. We in the center. This was back in the city center before they had their country center. If you were placed in the middle aisles, you were pretty much a moose, a koan, a beginning koan student. So,
Hmm.
and then you were sort of put on the periphery if you were a subsequent koan student. So that was, I guess, a clue. But I don't know. I didn't really care what other people were doing.
Hmm.
I didn't have any interest in knowing
Hmm.
what others.
Yeah, I mean, I was just asking because I'm curious because at one point they would announce it and so forth.
Yeah, there wasn't there
That was
wasn't
long
there was
over.
that was long gone by the time I was there. I think
Mhm,
that was probably gone even by Kaplow's time.
mhm. So did you pass mood during the session?
Uh, well, as you know, passing Mu can be a process. It's not just like, oh, you're through,
Yeah.
meaning all the checking questions and things like that. So I would have sort of dips into some of the checking questions as I was entering samadhi and or
Hmm.
fluid, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just in the moment, fluid. So
Hmm.
there was no insight, but you know what I mean. There was no insight, but there was the beginnings of intimations, or
Hmm.
the nipping at the edges, and that continued for a while. But I left the Rochester Zen Center and studied with one of Kaplow's other successors, Lawson Sachter, who eventually ordained me. But so I started going. They had a group in town in Rochester, and I started working with them. I felt more of an affinity with
Hmm.
Lawson than I did with Bowden. Um,
And that's who
and
you
part
pass
of the
mood.
and so what's that?
That's who you pass mood with.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah. So it was during Sesshin Sunyo was giving Teisho, and I remember the exact thing she said. She was reading from the koan, where Huineng is being pursued in the Mumonkan, being pursued by Monk Myo,
Hmm.
and he comes to him and has this kind of opening experience, and then his question is there anything else still?
Hmm.
And and then that's when it was everything dropped away.
Hmm.
It was totally gone.
Hmm.
And yeah,
And did your teacher recognize that immediately, or
yeah,
with the Dokusan? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that lasted for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Was it a
yeah,
disappointment for you when it kind of wore off?
Uh, well, what happened was my grandmother died. So I was sort of in this la la land. I was in just the post bliss for weeks.
Mhm.
My girlfriend at the time just was like, "What the hell is going on with you?" You know. Um, and there were a few moments afterward where the experience became even more clear and more clear. And um, and so, but then I got a call that my grandmother had died, and so I was met the family, all of our family at the funeral, and that was like a big crash for me
Mhm.
because I was pulled right back into family dynamics,
Right.
and that has a way of doing it. My teacher Bowden, my first teacher Bowden Roshi, used to relish when students would go home for staff break because that would be their test of their practice.
Someone told me it was Ram Dass who coined this, but I really like the phrase, if you think you're enlightened, go spend some time with your family.
Exactly. Yeah, I forget who it was. It might have been Matsu, uh, somebody Basso. Uh, but one of the early teachers, basically said the same thing. Is when he goes back, everyone just knows him as
Mhm.
the neighborhood kid. I think Christ said something to the same thing. Jesus said something about the same thing.
Yeah.
You're you're just the carpenter kid.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So after passing Mu, then you, I guess, went on to the checking questions and then miscellaneous koans.
Yeah,
How was that for you?
it's all a blur now. I mean, it's been what 20 20 years or so. So I think it was just kind of a time of fluidity for the most part. Um, Meaning things were pretty open, and
Mhm.
I'd get snagged here and there. I was still kind of caught, a little bit in wanting to impress my teacher. I had gotten rid of most of that through therapy.
Mhm.
Um, that hadn't worked through, and I would say that's partially what led to my finally having some kind of opening was no longer being so self-concerned, and that set me straight. And but that was still an operation, so I'd still get snagged,
Mhm.
about or concerned about how the teacher was viewing me rather than the work itself. And so that took a number of years to sort of finally iron itself out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you got, so what were you doing for work at this point? What did you get your degree in and stuff?
Well, if I have a degree in art education and graphic design,
Mhm.
and so I worked as a graphic designer a little bit. I worked as an art teacher, and then after I left staff in Rochester, I was in residential staff, and then after I left staff, I got a job doing carpentry. So, because on staff, you learn gardening and housekeeping, and I didn't even know how to clean a toilet before being there really. Um, and once you're corrected enough, learn.
Mhm.
And part of it I learned carpentry at nights by myself, teaching myself, and then with the help of staff members, I learned different skilled trades. And then so when I left staff, I rented an apartment right down the street from the Zen Center, and just kind of got handyman jobs and started to build a what would become a career in carpentry.
And that's what you
Uh,
did most of your adult
yeah,
life?
that's what I did through my late 20s, into my 30s, and then until I went back to grad school for psychotherapy.
And when you say carpenter, are you talking about like building cabinets or like framing houses or all the
All
above?
the above. All the above. Yeah. In the early days, it was beautiful. I mean, the Sangha would just hire me. Different members would hire me to work on their houses, replacing gutters or
Mhm.
building a table or something simple. And then as I gained more experience, then I got bigger jobs. And then I worked for an ex Zen Center member who had a very high end carpentry company.
Mhm.
And so I learned the finer work, and and then went on my own after working for him for quite a while.
Seems like it'd be such a great practice job, because it's so physical and kind of embodied, you know.
In fact, I was just interviewing a little bit ago. I was just interviewing our Mason. We're building a memorial garden here at the Zen Center, and I wanted to interview him because he's a longtime practitioner, and doing stack stone walls and other kinds of masonry projects. And we were just talking about that very thing. How conducive it is to repetitive physical work, and how especially as a young person, how freeing that can be. To not get caught in thinking and overthinking, really, to be able to let that go and just breathe and work.
Mhm. At what point did you get ordained, and what was your motivation to do so? I mean, you were all in. It seems like you were living at the Zen Center and still like basically all in even after you moved out. It sounds like living close by. So I mean,
Yeah.
at what point of that part of that did you get ordained, and what did that mean to you? Like, what was your motivation?
Well, we relocated as a small group. A bunch of us relocated to Asheville, North Carolina, for Lawson and Sachter Roshis to begin their center. And I was all in there. I moved in and began building the Zendo and organizing the training program with
Was that kind of
them.
a schism, or was it just like a friendly movement down the road?
It had some problems.
Uh-huh.
They saw differently. Bowden Roshi and Lawson and Sunny. It just had different views of practice. Lawson was a psychotherapist and integrated that kind of work into his teaching.
Mhm.
And those early days, it was much more being, the tradition was to keep them separate.
Mhm.
And so they didn't see an eye on that. So we moved down there so that they could have their own space. It was just too small. Rochester was just too small of a town for so many sitting groups, and
Mhm.
because Tony Packer's group was still in town. But so anyway, so we bought a place, and after a couple of years of being in residence, that's when I asked to be ordained, and Lawson agreed. And
Mhm.
so we did a year-long novitiate period, and then did the Rochester version of what would be called, Tokudo.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what that initiate period, was there a curriculum, or was it just kind of informal, paying a bit more closer to you, attention to you?
Yeah, it was my particular ordination was grounded in a helping Lawson Roshi run a group in Florida. So as part of my work, I would travel with him to run sashins down in Clearwater
Mhm.
with that local group. And so I would go down early, set up sashins, work with the group, buy the groceries, get the kitchen, organize the rosters, blah, da, 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 you know. So it was just, you know, all the behind the stuff, learning to run every aspect of the center, and then eventually, give a talk or two, an encouragement talk, or a small Dharma talk, and then totally flop, um, and then in the meantime just continue your koan training. But in Rochester, the tradition is basically, to be a priest means that's your vocation. So
Mhm.
that was a pretty strong part of Kapleau's feeling, was that one should have a vocational commitment.
Maybe you can shed some light on this. Something I've never really understood. See, at some point, Yasutani, he created the Sambo Kyodan, I guess what it was called at the time, as a explicitly lay organization. He really valued lay Zen and felt like, clerical Zen was corrupt and, basically dead. And he thought there was vitality or maybe the most vitality in lay practice. And so that was his focus. But Kapelau seems to really be into like his tradition was like priests and ordination and residential training. So was that something? Did Yasutani switch after he was working with Kapelau, or did Kapelau kind of break from him? Or do you understand the question?
Well, I can't say I'm an expert in that. Maybe like a first generation teacher like Bowden Roshi or somebody else would be have much more information. But Kapelau was ordained as an unsui by Yasutani, so he went through the beginning stages of ordination in Japan. I have the photos of that. ceremony. And I think even Yamada Koan Roshi was ordained, but
Was he?
kind of
Okay.
behind closed doors. It wasn't made public. But I think Yasutani Roshi still wanted to make sure, just for legitimate purposes, with the Soto shoe and all that, that he was a registered priest. And
Mhm.
because the Japanese, that's just how they work. It's very hard to break with tradition, and so I think even though our school was characterized somewhat by going against the grain, with Sambo Zen, I
Mhm.
think there was still a concern about the legitimacy of who was made a teacher and all that. So I think I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but what I heard was Yasutani ordained Yamada Koan, but he never lived or worked as a priest.
Mhm.
And
He's wealthy,
Kapelau was
actually,
very
wasn't he? He's a wealthy businessman, is my understanding.
was yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe he wasn't, but his the current abbot of Sambo Zen, Yamada Rion Roshi,
Yeah.
uh, I think has some corporate, works high up in
I think
banking.
both of them, actually. Yeah.
Yamada Rion or Yamada Koen Roshi, I think, was the administrator of a hospital.
Yeah. And then also a perfume company or something at one point, or I don't know. Maybe I might be mixing up different people. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So was there any? So obviously, there's you referenced earlier kind of the incomplete or training of Capello, and what was that talked about? Was there awareness of this? Was it cared about? Or I mean,
I didn't know anything about it until much later.
really
Um,
interesting.
yeah, I mean, it just wasn't on my radar. I don't, I was just doing my thing, just doing the practice. But at some point, I think it was in the mid 2000s, maybe early 2000s. It's on Rochester's website. Bowden Roshi gave a Teisho on the whole thing, and
I remember when that came out, actually. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was really the first that I really got more knowledge about that, and and I still didn't really care. I mean, that's the thing about the common thing I know about all of Kapleau's successors is he was the real deal, whether he had official transmission or not. To them, he was their teacher, and there was, like, with my teacher Lawson, there was never a doubt in his mind ever about Kapleau's abilities and his commitment to the practice. So
Mhm.
that's what most came through.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah. And then, so you finished that koan curriculum, is that correct?
Yes, I went through the Blue Cliff record.
Yeah. And then,
And
were you made a teacher at that point?
no,
No.
no, I wasn't a teacher. I was just, at the time, I was living in Asheville, working with Windhorse Zen community. That's what I helped my teacher set up. And then my wife at the time wanted to go to grad school, but there was no options for her in Asheville. So I wanted to continue koans because I just love koan training. And at that point, Sevan had already finished them, and Bowden had worked with Bowden backwards, giving them back to Bowden Roshi. And I called Bowden Roshi and I asked him if we could continue work together because my wife wanted to go to grad school and Rochester would be a perfect place. And so we moved back, and I sort of reintegrated into the Rochester community
Mhm.
and began working on subsequent koans into the Shoyoroku. Yeah.
Oh, did someone
Okay,
else
can
pass
we
it
can,
to him?
can we pause for just 1 second so I can go to the bathroom?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, yeah, so you moved back to Rochester, and you were studying with Bowden again. Is that correct? And did he make you a teacher, or like at what point? No.
No, no.
Oh,
So
I
we
know.
worked. Yeah.
I forget what I was going to ask. So does someone give him? So it looks like he was working on koans that um, Kapelau didn't pass down to him. So where did he get the more recent koans, I guess?
He got them from Sevan.
Oh, I get it. I see.
Sevan was his student, but then worked backwards.
From James's lineage.
James gave them to Sevan, and Sevan gave them to Bowden, so that
Oh,
Bowden then could begin to offer them.
that's what I missed. Okay, yeah, yeah. I thought you were saying they were working on the same koans that he passed, and they were just working them back. I get it.
Yeah.
So did you find that the koans were basically the same for you? Were they, or I'm not articulating this well? Was it kind of like business as usual, or did you feel like the nature of the koans changed when you kind of got more into the Soto curriculums, the Soto anthologies? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, I think the Blue Cliff, the Blue Cliff record is I think to my mind the most probably one of the most important books ever written.
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful. But the Shoyoroku, I think what changed for me was I began to, it seemed to have a more mellow quality to it. You would often get these interchanges between two equals, two teachers, and they would just kind of do this dance together.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was less about a brash monk coming in to prove himself. I mean, of course that was still there, but
Mm-hmm.
but it had a side to it that of refinement of the practice for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think I began to mellow at that point too, because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's a lot of people say they are more blown away by the Blue Cliff record, but I really was super impressed with the Gateless Gate, because I really felt like Blue Cliff record a little bit, but mostly with the Blue, like I felt like the order of the koans was really artfully done in the Gateless Gate. Like I didn't think it was it didn't seem like a random collection. It seemed to take you on a journey, so to speak. And like the way the koans, I was so impressed with the Gateless Gate. I mean, I love the Blue Cliff record, don't get me wrong, but I just thought the Gateless Gate was amazing. I just was so blown away with how that worked.
Yeah, the Gateless Gate is really to clarify the essential aspect, right? And the Blue Cliff record, although it does that as well, it's sort of more of a taking you into what Lawson Roshi used to say. This is a book to teach future teachers, and whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I think the Gateless Gate is incredibly powerful, and for me too, it was the way you work in Doksan is much, very direct, and the koans are shorter for the most part, and so I think it has a power that the Blue Cliff made. It's just different, it's really hard to put into words.
Yeah.
And I think it shifts for me. It shifts over time too. Sometimes I find myself nowadays drawn right back into Monkan, and other times just with the energies that I'm feeling.
Yeah. So interesting for me to go back and especially look at the miscellaneous koans, and like it's just clear. Like I passed them, but I didn't get it. I mean, I got it enough, obviously, but like it's just so interesting to go back and look at them, like, oh, okay, I see what they were trying to do there.
Yeah, I back in 2017, I reviewed those with Henry Schuckman, and he really put me through the paces on those.
Mm-hmm.
He said, if you were a beginning student, that would be fine. But since you're a teacher, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. And that was great. It was fantastic because Henry takes them very, very deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's of course I only know his public persona. He's such a lovable, almost like teddy bear. But I've heard like in Dokusan, he can get pretty, I don't know if intense is the right word, but like
that's a good word.
Yeah.
And this is the case with even with James Ford Roshi, people see the sweet, mellow, the sort of the old Tokusan,
Uh-huh.
the Tokusan, and
Right.
and you know, and how he mellows. You see him through the koans begin to mellow,
Hmm.
right? And that's what you see with James Roshi, and yet in Dokusan, better be ready.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's always two sides.
Hmm. So at what point did you decide to go to grad school and become a therapist?
I since my work with Lawson Roshi, Lawson was a trained psychotherapist and had been, as I said before, sort of integrating those things, exploring that integration, and so with my work with him, I was always sort of had that sort of sense that this might be a direction I would go because it changed my life so drastically to do therapy, and so he and I had some conversations, and I was living at Windhorse, and at some point he suggested maybe I just take some classes and get into some of the trainings under the guise of being a priest and working with people, but not so much for a career, but just because when you're doing Daison, which is kind of, you know, in our lineage, where a senior student meet with, for it's not Dokusan, but you can't work with koans, but or if you're just running sashins with people, you're running into all kinds of dynamics, interpersonal and dynamics. And so he thought it would be helpful for me to have some kind of understanding of basic psychological understanding and how to work with people.
Hmm.
And so I began to do some trainings and then eventually decided to go to grad school for it so that I could, not because I wanted to be a career a psychotherapist, but so I could get into more trainings because you weren't allowed into some of the trainings without a degree.
Hmm.
And so I did that, and started going to grad school, and again, still had no interest in being an actual therapist
Hmm.
until I started doing my internship. And that really was an eye-opening experience to work with populations that had previously no exposure to, people with, severe and persistent mental illness and serious addiction problems, lifelong um, personality disorders and things like that. And that really was incredible to work with people in that way. And so that's when I started going, oh, okay, so it's no longer about just doing this to help with people in formal practice, but actually my own formal practice is helping me work with people in
Hmm.
the therapeutic context to be able to hold space for those folks.
So this is a question I ask pretty much all um, hybrid therapists and practitioners. What do you see as the difference between spiritual maturation and psychological maturation, or spiritual development and psychological healing? Do you think it's on the same spectrum? Do you think it's works on the same plane? Do you think it's a different thing altogether that blends together nicely? I mean, what's your kind of unified grand theory of this?
Yeah, it's really hard to tease out, to be honest. Like, it's really hard to tease out. I think, um, was it Yamada Koan Roshi who said nothing distinguishes the enlightened person? It it's really about just becoming a full human being,
Hmm.
you know. Um, it doesn't really matter what kind of insight we have, so to speak. It's how we put that into use. If I've known people that have had so-called openings or Kensho experiences, and they're complete assholes,
Hmm.
um, and they have a lot of work to do on themselves. So that's the project, I think, is to become open, to become compassionate, to become available for other people. And so whether that's through therapy or I don't know, anything else really, formal Zen practice or yoga or just, you know, just through work and family. I mean, I don't think it matters. I think it really is about the end result or the continuing unfolding of somebody. And so I find that they're complementary tool sets.
Hmm.
they're all tools in our toolbox, and to try to separate them out is I think that's where you run into problems.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't say everybody needs therapy, but it can be helpful. Even if you so-called don't need therapy, it can be helpful to work on those stuck places wherever it might be
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
somebody who's
there was actually a period maybe 10 years ago or so. I thought like I should do therapy. And so, we belong to Kaiser. So I signed up for therapy with Kaiser. And they do like there's a triage person. And by the way, let me know if we're getting close on time I know you have a
yeah.
appointment. Yeah. Um, and she thought like, I'm gonna have to exaggerate your symptoms to get you in, to a therapist. And I got to the therapist and I told him, what did I want to work on? And he interviewed me and stuff. I remember he saying like, well, what where you are is where I try to get my patients to. Like, I don't really have anything to offer you. And
Mm.
I thought, well, that's a bunch of bullshit. And so then I went to another therapist in the system and they said the same thing. And it made me realize that there seems to be this gap between like American therapy services or, whatever. It seems to be geared towards people who are really struggling, right? But someone who's just trying to like optimize their life, doesn't really there doesn't really seem to
Yeah.
be a space for them,
Yeah. That the American mental health system is all kinds of screwed up, um, and 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 so we could spend a whole hour on that easily. But you're right. But it's part of it is the skill set of the therapist too.
Hmm.
I found that most therapists don't really. I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant because, well, I just don't want to, but a lot of therapists just don't know what they're doing.
Hmm.
They go to grad school, they get a degree, but they really don't have a lot of post grad training. They don't really work in depth. And it was surprisingly shocking to me to find out in grad school that a lot of people that graduate with degrees in psychology or psychotherapy haven't done therapy themselves,
Hmm.
which is mind blowing.
Hmm.
Um, it'd be like, you're a Zen teacher, but you've never done sesshin. Like, Um, I'm not surprised at what your experience was, that they weren't able to find a way to work with you,
Hmm.
and that's too bad because there is a lot to be said for refining our character just by seeing how we hold back or um, how we reenact patterns or things that are very unconscious to us, and having somebody that can see those and point them out to us you know, can be very healing and life changing.
Yeah. I kind of my even though I'd lived at a monastery stuff, I kind of felt like when Zen really clicked for me, I was actually working with in Charlotte Joko Beck's lineage, the Ordinary Mind Zen school. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's hard to get more contemporarily psychological Zen lineage than that one. But I but even still there, like I would like there was how can I articulate this? It it still seemed different than just psychological work. There seemed to be an opening up, of perception, I guess I could say, that doesn't seem to be in just pure therapy.
It depends on the therapy you're talking about. So in the particular school that I practice in, it's very experiential.
Hmm.
It's real time experiential, but it's also working with unconscious dynamics, and getting in touch with our core feelings and things that we've warded off.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's not cognitive. You don't sit around and just shoot the shit. It's
Hmm.
not a fireside chat.
Hmm.
It's in-depth, focused work. Um, and you work at the way I work and the way I've been trained to work is you always work at somebody's highest capacity. So you have to be careful. You have to know how to monitor somebody's capacity. When are you working past their capacity? When are
Hmm.
you working too low?
Hmm.
You have to get somebody sort of in there. It's like sports, if got to put somebody through the paces to really see change. And so finding that sweet spot is really important. But it's not just people have, unless you've done experiential therapy, it's really easy to misunderstand it. And that's why I think a lot of teachers have that fear of psychologizing the practice and everything like that, because what they're referring to is cognitive therapies, which in my estimation, they don't do as much as they claim. And it's only when we work at the deeper levels of feeling and getting at the unconscious roots of our anxiety or whatever our problems are that we resolve those fully. It's not just it's not just about let's manage our symptoms. It's really about getting rid of those patterns for good.
Yeah, I think even like cognitive behavioral therapy, where I've never done it, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of it's just like reframing delusion, to something maybe a little more vertical or realistic. But I think even there, I'm not sure if it's like thought reprogramming this works. I have this theory that really what it is, when you're kind of becoming aware of these kind of delusional thought patterns, I think just being aware of it in and of itself kind of takes away some of their believability, even if you're not reframing them. Like I wonder if like the reframing is, they think that's what's the important part, but it's really just awareness of the patterns, like just seeing them.
But that too, it's the same within Zen, with mindfulness. You can become very aware of your patterns to the point of hypervigilance. I know a lot of Zen people that are very perfectionistic and sort of caught up in how they do things. And so rather than having mindfulness free them, it actually makes them more obsessive or more hypervigilant. So at some point we have to let that go.
So when you have a student that's in that mode, what do you prescribe for them?
It's really up to them. What is their goal? I don't really prescribe anything without first checking with them. What do you want to work on? It's not up for me to decide. And so we spend a lot of time there. Why are you practicing? And they'll, and even when they answer, it might just be a sort of unthought about answer. So we spend a lot of time clarifying. Maybe the first step on the path is why are you practicing? Why are you practicing? Why are you here right now? And so putting it back on the student over and over again, I think, is important.
Do you have any students that you don't do koans with, that you just have a more free form and unstructured Dokusan relationship, or does pretty much everyone do koans?
Well, it's not unstructured, but I don't do koans with everybody. For me to begin to work with somebody on a koan, they have to be really clear about why they would want a koan. I've seen too many people just kind of waffle back and forth about working on a koan. And if somebody isn't psychologically sound enough, it can really tie into some of the punitive superego, right? So you give somebody a koan, and it's like anything, it's like a relationship. They will bring to it all of their unresolved stuff. And so it's a beautiful opportunity, but it's also, if you're not careful, it can lead to a sense of failure. And you could say, well, that's a part of traditional practice, and it is. But for people that are in that haven't worked on themselves in certain ways, that can lead just to them dropping out of practice, feeling like a failure. And here's one more thing I'm shitty at koans, and this doesn't work for me. And that's a shame when that happens. You know what I mean?
See, I needed that. Like I needed to see the like limit of trying and just like, okay, I give up. Clearly this is not working, like trying is not working. I really needed that. I mean, and I wasn't working on koans at the time, but still it was the same kind of dynamic where I was trying to like impress a teacher and
so all those dynamics have to get all those dynamics have to get fleshed out in Doksan. So you have to get to all the people pleasing, all the ways that people are holding back, all the ways that are getting in the way of actual genuine practice. And that takes time, and it takes, a committed relationship. You can't just force that on somebody. So if somebody's a Shokin student, a formal student of mine, that gives me permission to work with them deeper than, say, somebody just comes in to try Dokusan.
Mm-hmm. So what's your criteria for making someone a Shokin student? And for people, this is a ceremony where they formally become your student, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more of a felt sense on my part. Somebody has to want it, obviously, but it's somewhat about time. I want to see somebody consistently showing up. I want to see people being a part of the Sangha, not just coming to sit and leaving, but I want to get to know somebody. I want to see how they interact with people. And then eventually I want to see somebody come to Sesshin. Because
and so how does, if you have a little more time, I'd just switch to how kind of your centers run now. So you're a resident there, right?
Yep. Yeah. I live in a little parsonage on the property.
And with your wife and your daughter, is that correct?
Yeah.
Is your wife a practitioner? Is she?
Yeah. We met at the Rochester Zen Center many years ago.
I see.
Yeah. So she's a student of James Ford Roshi, and
you mentioned that. That's right.
Yeah. She works with him mostly online, but they have an affinity with the UU work as well, because my wife's a UU director of religious education. That's
her job.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. And do you guys have other residents there at the center?
Not currently.
You're outside of Charlotte, is that right? Or outside of Raleigh? Where are you guys?
Outside, about 40 minutes southwest of Raleigh, 20 minutes south of Chapel Hill.
And do you get people from Raleigh and Chapel Hill and stuff like that?
Yeah. We do. But no current residents. I needed a break from residents because, that's a lot of work to organize a residential program and always be meeting with students and coming up with work projects and managing people. It's like having a big family. So when we fostered to adopt, I decided that I needed a break, and that may change again. I have a few people that are interested right now. So I want to try that. But our kind of residential program is more of integrated. So I ask that people have, a job or school or some outside responsibilities aside from just being here. And so that integration is a part of what we do.
And do you ordain, or would you ordain students? Are you still seeing this as a clerical path in your lineage?
If somebody has a calling for that, I've had a lot of people ask, not a lot, but I've had a few people ask. Mostly I say no, because they're not ready. Or I'll say, here's the requirements. And usually people say, oh, well, thank you, but no, thank you.
What are those requirements? If you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, sure. Well, right now, who knows what it'll be in the future, but right now you have to do at least 100 days of Sesshin. You have to be showing up consistently. You have to be a Shokin student. And you have to have at least 5 years of practice under your belt. Usually I want to see closer to 10. But I've, not through much my own experience, but through what I've seen in the American Zen scene, you see a lot of ex-priests. You see people that it's kind of the romantic notion of it. They love the robes and all the trappings, but it's not really their life calling. And so that takes a long time to clarify. So I want to see somebody that's mature. And so I am ordaining somebody soon. I have somebody that's on the track. And they're retired. They've lived a full life, and they've proven themselves to be a consistent, stable part of our sangha for many years. That's what I want to see. It's not just I won't do monastics. I will just do priests.
It's more like a service-oriented outlook on practice.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it. Once they're ordained, they have to have a service component to their So aside from serving the Sangha, they have to have an outside service commitment, whether that's with geriatric population or homeless or whatever. It can be lots of different things, but I want to see that it's a community oriented thing as well as a Zen Center thing.
Would you give koan teaching authority to a non-ordained student? Like, do you
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they're separated in your mind, like
Separate.
Dharma transmission and ordination? They're not a prerequisite for either direction or anything.
Yeah. With any teaching authority, I want insight. And what I'm really concerned about in American Zen is, the old analogy of when you make a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, and how it can just get blurrier and blurrier. So, and I think that's happening even in the koan tradition, where people's insight isn't clear, and then they get teaching authority, and then their students and next generation after that, and see how it would get watered down. And that's my concern. And so I want to see somebody before I pass them even on Mu. It's got to be very clear.
Yeah, that was my next question. What is your Mu passing criteria? And one thing I've just been fascinated doing these interviews, and a lot of them have been discussions after the formal interviews over, just seeing what an incredible variety of philosophies people have on when do you pass someone on Mu. Like, some people are super strict. Some people are like, well, if they can answer, they can answer. And, and the people who have that philosophy, their argument is like, well, people will they'll just awaken along the way, like the self will awaken them, like they don't just hold them at Mu, and I was skeptical of that at first, but I've seen it in action, and I think it works actually,
Yeah, I don't have a template with that. Because I haven't been teaching that long too. I think this is just a continual evolution for me as well as for American Zen. I don't think there's a right or wrong with this stuff. I find myself, going back and forth with things too. So, but I do want to, I think that Kensho or glimpsing our nature happens in place and time. It's not an amorphous thing. There is this sudden insight. And it happened on, every one of the things that you find is that people remember when it happened, what they were doing. For a friend of mine, it was when he reached down in the aisle after sashimi was shopping in the grocery store and reached down for a box of cereal for his kid, and his world shifted at that point. And those moments are so important, but they're only moments, and those have to be widened and deepened and worked with, because they just also can become calcified and just memories otherwise. So it's not the end all be all, but it has to start there, I think, for me. So, and I want to see somebody change them. You can answer questions and things like that, but if it doesn't change your life, what's the point?
Yeah, it's really interesting about the whole, Kensho versus just wisdom, because I know plenty of people who tell me, I've never had a Kensho experience, but when you see them in action, there's clearly not that much self-referential stuff going through their heads. They're just kind of living their life directly as bodhisattvas. And,
Absolutely.
But it's interesting. There's the Kensho experience. There's definitely like a bodily component to it.
That's why we call it embodied practice.
Yeah,
because it really does. It goes into your tissues. It doesn't. It's not just up. It's not up here.
Yeah. Yeah, but it seems there's almost like a flushing out. That's a very dramatic. Like, it almost seems like it's like built into us, this capacity. And so and so I'm just wondering, like, in teaching Zen, like, I don't know if I'm really articulating this well, but like how important do you think this, like, obviously you're in a very Kensho oriented, lineage, and you said, but then again, there's examples of, I know people who are living their lives like very non-self-referentially, kind of clearly there's some liberation there, and so I really
Yeah,
wonder, does there really
well,
need to be one size
absolutely.
fits
So
all?
no, I think there's no one way to do it.
Yeah.
But with, as Henry says, if you're going to do koans,
Hmm.
in this particular style, do
Hmm.
them how they were intended, you know.
Hmm.
And it's if somebody wants to sit and do just sitting or breath practice, um, I mean, which is a practice for a lifetime.
Hmm.
Uh, that's a wonderful thing, and I'll support that, and I'll work with them deeply. If they have no aspiration for working on koans, that's fine.
Hmm.
We that's why I love the practice, because we have different, as Joshu says, I guess all doors lead to the capital city, but there's lots of doors that we can go in through, and so I don't push anybody into koans. They have to want it. They have to really want it, and they might try it for a while, and it might not be for them. So
Hmm.
there has to be a way, just like ordination. They might want it. There has to be a way to back out of these things gracefully,
Hmm.
without feeling ashamed or like, oh, I'm a failure,
Hmm.
or whatever. So we just have to try different things. So I try to keep that in mind. If that, I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, that makes a lot of sense. That answers the question. Thank you.
yeah.
So I've covered most of the stuff I was interested in. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about or
Well,
cover?
one of the things on my radar for the future, and this is, going out to all Zen teachers out there that might be listening, is my hope is that teachers learn how to work with people, you know, with their students' dynamics, their interpersonal dynamics, their unconscious dynamics in Doksan and outside of Doksan. I think that's one of the areas that Dharma teachers need more training in.
Hmm.
And so my hope is to get a cohort together at some point and begin to work on those things. How do you work with students that are coming from different backgrounds and different psychological and places, and how do you do that? It's not because, again, you're not necessarily taught that in your Dharma training.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time. And so if somebody wants to get a hold of you, it's through the website. The
Yep.
what's the URL again?
uh excuse me, NC Zen Center, like
Okay.
North Carolina, NC Center, zencenter.org.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, info@nczcenter.org. I get those emails and look at those, and they
Oh,
can.
one quick question I was going to ask. Sorry. I'm curious about the demographics of people that come to your center. Are you seeing younger people show up? Is it mostly old grizzled veterans? What's
I think it's pretty typical. There's a lot skewing towards baby boomers.
Mhm.
Um, as many people refer to it, the graying of the Sangha.
Right.
That's here too. But we know we have a number of young people. I have a whole cohort of Shokin students that are in their 20s and 30s. There
Great.
seems to be a missing dynamic of people in middle age when they're raising kids, and
Yeah.
for them to get to.
Yeah. I mean, when I had babies and toddlers, that was my least active Zen period by far. Because
Oh, you have kids?
oh yeah, I have they're 11 and 13 now, but when they were babies and toddlers, I mean, like every hour I was away from the house was, you know, more challenge for my wife. And so it was hard to leave.
Yeah. One thing I don't know if anybody's ever talked to you about, but that was one thing that my teacher Lawson, his experience of raising kids back in the 70s and 80s while doing intensive sesshin practice was, there were a lot of kids of that generation that grew up with parents that were practicing, that really have a lot of anger, with their parents for spending so much time doing sesshins. But with him, Kapelau Roshi would always let him go see his kids during sesshin. They would sneak him out to the Buddha hall
Mhm.
and bring the kids in and let them play together during
Mhm.
sesshin. And but it's something to be really conscious of how we work with families, and how do you do a live dynamic practice and still raise a family. That's what that's what we're always talking about,
Yeah,
my
I
wife and
probably went 5 years without doing a session because I couldn't. And this was like pre online Zen, and I just couldn't. I couldn't disappear for a week. It's just not an option.
yeah,
It's hard
yeah.
to disappear for a day. Because it's just when both when a parent's working and they got to take care of kids, it's really hard not to do it with two parents.
It is. I mean, we just had that with Sesshin here. Both my wife and I were in Sesshin, and I'm teaching, and she's attending with James doing Doksan with her.
Mhm.
And then, we're walking back to the house, and there's getting a ride off the bus, and,
Mhm.
making her a snack on our break, and
Mhm.
putting her to bed at night, and then getting back to the Zendo. So it's pretty challenging.
Mhm. Yep. All right. Well, thank you
Anyways,
so much.
you're welcome.
All right.
Okay.